we want to put this in some historic context. You're the author of an excellent book that lays out the history of Canada-China relations and how foreign interference has played a part of that. Let's start from the beginning. You describe in the book how Pierre Trudeau may have been an early target of Chinese Communist Party regime. Can you talk about what were their goals in targeting him and how did they go about this?
Sure. So, in the book, one thing I'd say off the start is that the historical record is still, much of it is still redacted. So it's hard to get the complete picture. So I tried to do what I could with the sources that I have. So I have a number of qualifiers just to make sure that I'm not exaggerating things or taking things out of context. But in general, what it appears to me from the documents that I was able to get declassified was that there was an attempt, it looks like there was an attempt to influence the Canadian government around the recognition of China. Now, that makes actually kind of sense, a lot of sense, in terms of the PRC wanting to engage in some type of influence operation because of how valuable they considered international recognition to be and wanting that recognition from the United States. So, in that sense, that seems plausible. And the way that it seems to have worked was through at least one avenue that it was used was by having an individual named Paul Lynn, who was an academic in Canada. The RCMP regarded him as an agent of influence for the CCP and that he was essentially representing China's interests. They were warning government. They considered him dangerous in this regard. And they were on him pretty tight in terms of surveillance for decades. And so one thing they do mention is that he was tasked with spreading the ideas of PRC recognition in support of it. And we know he goes on to the US after to do the same. So it appears that that was one of the main vectors that they were using to try to influence the Canadian government and by extension, Pierre Trudeau. I mean, I think that influence attempt may have actually likely started decades earlier, or a decade earlier when he went to China.
Interesting. Talking about Trudeau's earlier trip to China, in your book, you describe a book that Trudeau co-authored about one of his early visits to China. Can you tell us a little bit about some of the highlights from that book and what it reveals about Trudeau's views on China?
Sure. I mean, it reveals a few things. One, it reveals that he had this overly simplistic, romanticized view of China, and that the establishment of a new communist government there was doing wonderful things. And that it was, it had these open air prisons and there was no locks on the door. And there were these communes that were built that were all in one, doing all kinds of wonderful things for the people. And of course, what he doesn't discuss or he isn't shown is the horrors of the Cultural Revolution. He isn't shown the famine that's taking place in China. He hasn't shown any of these things, or the subjugation of Tibetans. And so it leaves you. So on one side, that's what his interpretation is overly romanticized and simplistic of what's going on there. On the other, it reveals that they went to a great deal of trouble to portray China in this way to Trudeau. Now, why would you do that? Just off the face of it, it seems to me like it's because maybe they were potentially investing in this individual. I mean, that's not unheard of, and it wouldn't in the counterintelligence world. It wouldn't be unheard of for foreign states to, put a bunch of eggs in a bunch of different baskets, hoping that something turns out. So it wouldn't surprise me if they were trying to get a nice romanticized view of China for Pierre Trudeau in the hopes that this might pay off down the road. I mean, they even had his books in a little fake library there to flatter him, so to speak. So, why go to all that trouble for just an average academic tourist or lawyer? Right? It doesn't make sense.
Do you think that Trudeau knowingly allowed this to occur? Both the earlier episodes that you talked about when he was visiting and getting material for his book, but then later when he led sort of the Canadian connection with the PRC. Do you think Trudeau knowingly allowed this to occur?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think there was I think there was an overly romanticized view of countries like China, and that they could do things differently, and that there was a progressive movement there that could solve the problems that capitalism could not solve. And so I think he was very eager to maybe try to believe that and see what he wanted to see in that sense. I wouldn't see it as overly malicious in the sense of willfully doing something against Canadian interests, but I think overly romanticized and a willingness to believe that this is possible, that something better has emerged there. And I think there's some new biographies actually of Trudeau that'll be coming out that kind of show that.
You'd mentioned earlier that one of the objectives of the Chinese may have been to get Canada to recognize the PRC, and perhaps their one China policy. Um, Maybe a bit of speculation now on your part, but what do you think would have been in Canada's best interest when it came to both of those activities, so the recognition of the PRC and one China? What should Canada perhaps actually have done at the time?
It's hindsight's 2020, I guess, in a way. But I the part that I have the most difficulty with is that the Taiwan issue, because that's something that was critically important for the PRC. Because in the eventual recognition of China, and it's worth pointing out, Canada wasn't the first one to recognize China. I mean, the French, the English had done it before the UK had done it, but they weren't so, I would say, dialed into the Taiwan issue in the way the PRC wanted it. And so for Canada, when they note the PRC's position on Taiwan, the PRC interprets that and interpreted it as accepting their position. And so that element of the Taiwan issue, I wish that Canada had not been so explicit over. And even if they felt that the recognition talks were going slightly sideways, then maybe that would have been for the best. Because I think there was an over reliance or a zeal to try to be first out the gate in terms of North America, and really do this so that other countries could copy it, so that the United States could pay attention. And it was really, I felt that from reading the documents, there was this effort for Canada to kind of do some nationalist kind of chest thumping. In other words, let's be internationally recognized for this and beat the United States. And even Trudeau mentions at one time that they beat the Americans to this. And I think that kind of blinded them to accept things that maybe they shouldn't have accepted.